Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I know we have a nice big audience tonight, so I'm just going to give it about a minute or so before we officially start, just to make sure that everyone has been able to join the Zoom webinar. But in the meantime, I've put some helpful links in the Zoom chat that everyone can check out. Also, feel free to put in the chat where you are tuning in from. We always like to see where in the world our audience is joining from. Oh, oops, and I've just made that smaller. But again, for those just joining, thank you and welcome. I'll give it maybe just about another 30 seconds to make sure everyone has been able to join. It looks like most people are here, so we'll get started soon. We have some people joining us from NYC, so thank you to our locals. Also, Evanston, Pennsylvania, LA, West Virginia. So really all over. Thank you all so much for being here with us this evening. I think it looks like most people have been able to join, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to today's panel discussion on the World War II history of the Greenbrier Resort. Now, here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you again for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able to, you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn those on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Again, that's the Zoom Q&A box and not the chat. Now, today we are honored to be joined by Benyamin Cohen, Harvey Solomon, and Dr. Robert Conte. Harvey Solomon is a freelance writer based in Washington, D.C., who has written a half dozen nonfiction books, including Such Splendid Prisons. He has written hundreds of articles for trade and consumer publications, including Adweek, the Boston Globe, China Daily, Editor and Publisher, Emmy, The Hollywood Reporter, The Los Angeles Times, Real Screen, Smithsonian, and Variety. He holds a BA in history from Clark University and an MBA from Boston University. Benyamin Cohen is a senior writer at The Forward, where he authors their morning newsletter of what's driving the American Jewish conversation. He is the author of 2 books, The Einstein Effect, How the World's Favorite Genius Got into Our Cars, Our Bathrooms, and Our Minds, and My Genius Year, A Rabbi's Son Wanders the Bible Belt in Search of His Own Faith. He lives with his wife in West Virginia, with their 3 dogs, a cat, and a flock of chickens known as the Co-Hens. Dr. Robert Conte recently retired from the Greenbrier Resort after having served as their official historian for 43 years. While at the Greenbrier, Dr. Conte maintained the resort's archives and the President's Cottage Museum, while also giving lectures and tours. He wrote the book, The History of the Greenbrier, America's Resort. Thank you all again for joining us, and now I'm going to hand things over to our speakers.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm gonna share my screen. We're 5 years into Zoom. Let's uh, see if I can do it correctly. I think I got it. Share. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Thumbs
Yeah,
up.
Harvey says thumbs up, so that means yes. All right, so I'm going to be the least interesting person of the panel. Harvey and Bob are the real Greenbrier experts. I'm here just to help guide the conversation a little bit. My own personal interest in the Greenbrier came because I moved to West Virginia over a decade ago. Very few Jews here in West Virginia, and I always heard the story of the Greenbrier. It's still an active, as you can see from the photo on your screen, it's still an active resort. It's, over a century old, and people still go, and you could stay there, and there's a golf course, and it's a very luxury resort. And I, as the writer for the Forward, the National Jewish newspaper, I decided to go and write a story about this uh, very intriguing chapter in the Greenbrier's history during World War II, when um, some Nazi and Japanese and Italian diplomats were put up at the Greenbrier at the Americans' expense. And for my article, it is on the Forward's website. I had the wonderful opportunity to interview Harvey and Bob. And so it's great that they're here for all of you. We're going to maybe do 35 minutes, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for questions because I'm sure lots of people have lots of good questions. Um, so first, to get us in the mood, Harvey wanted me to play this. Can people hear that music? Harvey, can you hear it?
No, not yet.
No? All right.
No,
All right.
no
Well,
audio.
we'll just go on to the next slide then.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to start. It was very 1940s music. We're going to start this story before the war began. Harvey, do you want to set the stage for us of what was happening at this time in America and how the Greenbrier fits into it?
Sure. Basically, in the 30s, it was the whirl and the swirl of social life in Washington, D.C. The diplomats were a big part of that. And the social scene was always covered by newspapers. That was where everybody paid attention. And there were 4 active newspapers in DC. The Post is still around, the Evening Star, the Daily News, and the Record American, and they were just covering it. This is the embassy of the old hulking Nazi embassy in Foggy Bottom, kind of midway between the White House and Georgetown. And this was the place where the diplomats entertained. The German diplomats were always quite popular, but as the drumbeats of war grew closer, as the 30s marched on, and there was Japanese aggression in the Far East and German aggression in Europe, the positions of the diplomats were severely lessened, and they were far less popular.
So, and at this time, just to maybe give a little bit of background, Bob, at this time, if we were to zoom our camera over to West Virginia, the Greenbrier has been around since when? Give us a little background about the Greenbrier.
The Greenbrier has been there actually longer than most people imagine. It goes back well before the Civil War. So throughout the 19th century, White Sulphur Springs was a fashionable summer mineral spring resort, very much a southern resort. That was its. Of course, it was Virginia back before the Civil War. In fact, there was a cluster of resorts right on today's West Virginia borders, and this is in the stagecoach days, and people would come up and spend the summer up there, and there was always sort of a political subplot. Five sitting American presidents visited White Sulphur Springs before the Civil War. And then by the early 20th century, the resort started to decline, but it's sitting on a major railroad line, the old Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. They bought the property in 1910. They then bought what we think of as they built the Greenbrier Hotel, what you're looking at here. That central part opened in 1913. They added a golf course in 1914, the old white course, which is still there. And it's all about the railroad. And so a lot of people from New York and Washington and Philadelphia along the railroad line, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Chicago. The Greenbrier presented itself there in the 20s and 30s as just overnight from 4/5 of the American population. Well, that's all by train, and that's why the railroad owned it. So it's a very fashionable resort, particularly in the spring and autumn. People live I call the Palm Beach Newport axis. Wintered in Palm Beach and summered in Newport, Rhode Island. they would stop at the Greenbrier in the spring as they were going north, and in the fall as they were going south.
Uh-huh.
And then it still sort of maintained that old southern feel in the summer months in those decades right before the Second World War.
Yeah. And like you said, it's only 200 miles around, from 200 miles to DC. So a lot of politicians, and because there was easy access, the train literally stops on the campus of the hotel. It was a very easy place for politicians to go for a quick vacation. As you said, many presidents live there. I think you showed me, like, there were pictures of celebrities and royalty and, big industrialists, wealthy, the titans of the industry all came here. So it was a very it was the talk of the town to see and be seen, and they had ballroom dances, and it was very much of the social set that we think of that era.
Oh yes, the whole nine
Yeah.
yards. And golf was always a big draw. And then one of the changes in the 30s in the Depression years is the Greenbrier and the Homestead across the way started to attract conference business. So very powerful trade associations, professional associations would also meet particularly in the spring and autumn. And so very influential people were coming as part of these meetings.
Hmm. Now, Harvey, moving back to moving the camera back to DC. Do you want to introduce us to some of these characters that we're going to be seeing at the Greenbrier?
Sure. Bring up that first one.
This one?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we have what I call the first of the three Hans, three German ambassadors in a row who all had that position. This is Hans Luther, the gentleman on the right with the fashionable bowler hat, Weimar Republic official, ex-banker, threw a good party, spoke perfect English. To his left is his counterpart. That's the Japanese ambassador, Hiroshi Saito, who was wearing that fine top hat. Also a very popular guy. This is mid-30s. Unfortunately, Saito passed away. He was very much against going to war with the US. And when he passed away in 1938, FDR sent his body back on a ship to Japan, a real sign of support at that time, which was going to be fraying very suddenly. If you can give me the next slide, we can give you, here we go. This gentleman standing here under the flag, that's the second Hans. His name is Hans Dietrich. And he came over after Hans Luther went back. And he was another kind of what I call an old school diplomat, meaning parties and pomp were far more interesting to him than actually policy was. But he's here with a group of German businessmen. There was the Bund, which was the German-American Association that was very powerful in the isolationist circles in the 30s. So he only lasted a couple of years. And then if we can go to the next slide, here we have the main event. On the right, this is Hans Thomsen. The medals on his chest are all the medals that he earned during the Great War. He was a soldier. On the left is his wife, Anneliese. She was known in French as Bébé, which was shortened in America to baby. They were one of the most suave, sophisticated couples in the diplomatic service. They epitomized what was called the Nazi diplomacy of sweetness and light. They spoke beautiful English. Hans Thomsen actually spoke with a British accent because he had a governess when he was growing up in Hamburg. So that always threw people. But they, to the public, put on a very nice face of Nazism, which was then beginning to take over more and more territory in Europe, just as Japan was doing in the Far East.
Yeah, so this was, in the lead up to the Holocaust but these people that we're looking at, these pictures, these people were all diplomats in DC and in the US.
Yes, the first two, here's an example. This is the invitation. Note the embossed eagle and swastika at the top. This is from Hans and Frau Thomsen, inviting everyone to come to the German embassy to celebrate someone from the Red Cross. That was the kind of diplomacy that the Germans did. They weren't talking at all about the war effort and what was really going on. but this is an embossed invitation that went out, and this would have been in probably about 1937. And again, they were very popular then.
You know, and one of the things we'll get to when we talk about when they all moved to the Greenbrier and they were treated like, you know, regular guests of the they were treated like regular guests of the Greenbrier. They brought their children and they brought their pets. Do you want to, Harvey, tell us what we're looking at?
Yeah. Well, this one didn't make it. This is Frau Thompson, who was an animal lover and an equestrian and a clothes horse. And here she is with her pet squirrel named Benyamin. He was a red squirrel that she brought over on the ship to America. And indeed, as you can see, this squirrel stayed on her shoulder. I especially like the little bell around its neck, if you can see that close enough. One reporter gushed that it was like a fur neck piece around her neck. I guess if you like your neck pieces with claws, that's what we would have. She, unfortunately, Bianxian ran away, and it was a little story in the paper, was never to be found again. The blackened marks just on each side, just so you'll know, these are newspaper photos, and those black crayon marks on both the left and the right are where they were cropping the photo, where it appeared in the Evening Star, because indeed, the diplomats at this point were, the Axis diplomats were quite popular.
Do you want to explain what we're looking at here?
Sure. As the drumbeats of war grew louder, they reverberated in Washington, D.C. from the events happening, of course, in Europe. And in this case, there were basically two sides. There were the interventionists, like President Roosevelt, who wanted to confront fascism and totalitarianism wherever it was. And then there were the isolationists. And that is, as you can see here, the America First Committee, which was referred to by the other side as the Nazi transmission belt. And indeed, the Nazis funded a lot of activities that these supposed American groups, this committee, were putting forward. And in the end, what happened was when Germany started World War I, it invaded Poland on November 1st of 1939. Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State, and his wife, Frances, who was Jewish, were staying at the Greenbrier when the war began in Europe. But of course, at that point, America was not yet in the war. Roosevelt was trying to stay out and basically dodging what everyone knew was coming, which was war, which is what happened when, of course, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 41.
Yeah.
And if you can jump back one more, this is I want to just say, this is a perfect example. It's hard to see this, but I'll run through it very quickly for you. U.S. intelligence prior to the war was just completely at odds with each other. There were a smorgasbord of groups. There was Army intelligence, known as G2. There was naval intelligence, the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, which is where this letter is from. There was also the FBI, of course, with J. Edgar Hoover. And there was the State Department. And they were all basically at each other's throats. They all wanted to be the ones who were providing intelligence information. As an example, the White House, literally 1 week, G2 Army intelligence would provide the information, and the next week ONI would. So this is kind of a recipe for failure. And indeed, the US had no foreign intelligence service. There were all these other groups just acting players independently, fighting each other. Bill Donovan, who is the reason that I wrote this book, he was the most decorated soldier in World War I, led the Fighting 57th, ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue in New York. He was desperately trying to get FDR's attention, and they even though he was a Republican, they had the same mind. We needed better intelligence. In 41, Bill Donovan started the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. That morphed into the CIA after the war. But this letter, very quickly, you can see all those stamps on it. If you look closely, they're basically, it's a cornucopia of examples. There's the Passport Division, there's the Department of Foreign Correlation, which is one of the ones I love. This memo was written about a Japanese spy, and it reported that at an airport, his wife was waiting for him, struck up a conversation with a stranger. She told all about her husband's traveling. And the bottom line was, the plane landed, she went off with her husband. She never knew that the guy she was talking to was an agent for ONI, and he filed this report in August, right after he met. And that is an example of what American intelligence was doing prior to the war. It wasn't always miss, but excuse me, it wasn't always miss, but it was hit or miss. This is an example of the kind of work that all the departments were doing, but again, very sclerotic, not really connected to each other.
Just to go back to a point that Harvey made about how there was an America First committee and the Nazis were helping push propaganda in the U.S. I'm sure many of you in this group on this Zoom know about Rachel Maddow's book, came out a couple years ago. Prequel is all about that, and her podcast Ultra is also all about that. I want to keep us on track and make sure we get to the main crux of the stories. I'm just going to move us along here a little bit. So everything kind of shifted when Pearl Harbor happened. As Harvey was saying, America was staying out of the war, as far as boots on the ground and as far as getting involved at a big level. And then when Pearl Harbor happened, they were, taken by surprise and realized we need to get involved. And at that moment, and this is how this story really starts, is there are, at the moment we go to war with Germany and Japan, there are all these German and Japanese and Italian diplomats who are living in the U.S. They're, in D.C. and other offices around the country, San Francisco. And so the problem is, what are we going to do with these, over 1,000 diplomats and their families and their kids? We got to do something with them. And so the idea came up to find them 3 resorts to put them and their families in the resorts, at least temporarily, until they figured out a better solution. The resorts were the Greenbrier in West Virginia. There was another one in Virginia, and there was another one in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, the Grove Park Inn. And the reason you're probably all asking when attending this kind of Zoom is, why did the American government and the American taxpayer decide we should put them up in a 5-star luxury resort hotel? And we'll talk about that. The main reason, just to give away that, is we wanted reciprocity. We wanted our diplomats who were in Germany and Japan and in other parts of the world. We wanted our diplomats who were stuck overseas to be treated well. And so we figured that would be a good, a show of good grace if we did this, if we did that, to start a model of, we would treat them well, and with the hopes that our diplomats abroad would be treated well. Bob, can you tell us what was happening at the Greenbrier? We always think about government moves at such glacial pace. If a government program, right, it's going to take years for a government program to get into motion and whatever. So Pearl Harbor happened, and I think it was within 2 weeks. You correct me if I'm wrong. It was within 2 weeks the Greenbrier was ready to accept these diplomats. Can you tell us about what was going on at the Greenbrier at that time?
Yeah, it did happen very fast. So a couple of days after Pearl Harbor, the Germans declare war against the U.S. So to be precise, on December 17th, 1941, the manager of the Greenbrier, Lauren Johnston, gets a phone call. And would you consider accepting certain diplomats from the countries we're at war with? And so he calls a staff meeting, and apparently later that day, he gets another phone call saying, the president has ordered these diplomats out of Washington right now, and they agreed. And so that was December 17th, and on December 19th, 48 hours later, a train pulled up across the street. That's pretty fast. And I think it's because, as we were saying earlier, people in Washington, knew the Greenbrier and the homestead. They had vacationed there. They were accessible by rail. You got on the train in Union Station, you got off right across the street. They were isolated, which meant they were easily guarded. You know, there were Geneva Accords on how you were to behave in this situation, and the U.S. Stuck to those accords. So safety was a real issue, particularly for the Japanese, as you might imagine, just only a week or so after Pearl Harbor.
Mhm.
And they were first class accommodations. The primary thought on the State Department was the safety and the good treatment of the Americans overseas. And you know, if we treat their diplomats well, that'll go a long way to good treatment of Americans overseas. So it
Yeah,
was a
and
cold day in December when that first group of 159 German, Hungarian, and Bulgarian diplomats first arrived on December 19th.
did the Greenbrier have to kick out? Were there other guests there, or was it off season and there weren't really guests there?
Luckily, luckily, that was a very slow season. As I've sort of quipped in the past, it was easy to be patriotic when we really didn't have any business anyway. That was another thing. The Today, of course, this couldn't have happened for both the Homestead and the Greenbrier. They'd be packed in preparation for the holidays. But back then, there were very few guests in the hotel, and I think they left. They left pretty quickly.
Yeah, just a funny side note. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that Hallmark made a Greenbrier Christmas movie a few years ago.
Oh yeah, for 30 or 40 years now, Christmas has been. My wife was the social director and put on all the activities and decorated the hotel, so I'm very aware of Christmas at the Greenbrier. But back then, there was just a handful of people in the hotel.
To
And
amplify what Bob just said, the photo you're looking at is the Greenbrier when the diplomats arrived on December 19, 1941. That contingent that he mentioned was led by Hans and B.B. Thompson, and they swept into the Greenbrier, and that's where they would be wind up staying for longer than they had thought.
Right.
But to back up just a little, the way it happened, all of this was really FDR. The day after he announced that we were at the day of infamy, the famous speech that he gave in Washington, D.C., he only declared war on Japan. He purposely did not declare war on Germany or Italy. Many people wanted him to, but Hitler did what we expected. He immediately declared war on the U.S. So now it was a case of all three countries, the Germany, Italy, and Japan. FDR told J. Edgar Hoover, I want them out of the embassies where they can be communicating and sending cables and doing telephone. They need to be isolated somewhere. I don't care where they need to go, but we need to find a place. And as Bob so ably mentioned, the phone call came to both Lauren Johnston at the Greenbrier and at the same time, Faye Ingalls, the owner of the homestead in Hot Springs in Virginia, about an hour away. And there were only three requirements. They wanted it to be close to DC because there had to be a lot of traffic back and forth. They had to be nice hotels, and they had to be isolated because they wanted the diplomats not to have any contact with anyone. And that's indeed how it all transpired. If you can shoot to the next photo.
Yep.
This is the Nazi military attaché. His name is Friedrich von Bodecher. That's his wife and daughter with him. They were some of the prominent Germans that were there, in addition to Hans and B.B. Thompson, and indeed all the other employees of all the embassies, not just diplomats, but servants, children, businessmen, dogs. B.B. did not take her squirrel because he was gone, but they had a dog, and as did a few other Germans, and this was a splendid prison that they all had to be in.
yeah, the accommodations are kind of just what's so you have this cognitive dissonance is that the Greenbrier is this luxury resort, and you have, if you ever get to go, as I did in when I went in March, it's like, there's a whole area. It's like going to like a Vegas hotel, resort. There's like, loads of shops and stores and fine dining. There's a pool, there's a golf course. People brought their pets. There was, so it was. I think one of you, Harvey or Bob, you told me that there was an Olympic trainer who was like giving them swimming lessons or ice skating lessons?
Well, first of all, these were called destination resorts.
Yeah.
And so you got off the train, everything was there. And there was no reason to ever step off the property. The Greenbrier was often referred to as a little city. It had its own fire department, own security department, and so you had everything there. Um, um, yeah, there was a Olympic. Martha Aurelius actually was had won Olympic gold medals.
Uh-huh.
Um, she taught swimming. And here they are playing ping pong. Here, this is at the Greenbrier. Actually, over the
Wait,
years,
so these are Nazi diplomats playing and their families playing ping pong.
yeah, there are some of the Germans. It's right in the little
Uh-huh.
corridor. There's a ballroom. It's right behind them there. What this sort of brings to mind when I look at this is many times people have said, well, 6 months at the Greenbrier isn't exactly bad duty. These were high level, active people, and 6 months was a long time. And really, boredom, I think, was a big issue because what sort of haunted them was, I mean, this is real nice, but we may end, as far as they knew, they may spend the whole war there. When the Greenbrier agreed to do this, they were told 3 months maximum. Well, it went almost 7 months, much longer than the Greenbrier had anticipated, and it got into the busy spring session. So they put up ping pong tables. Shopping became a major activity. Um, uh,
They would get dressed up for dinner, right? This
oh
is
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, these were sophisticated people. These were world
uh-huh.
who well-traveled people. There were some weddings. This is an Italian couple getting married. There were 6 weddings. Three babies
Wow.
were born. No, 3 weddings and 6 babies were born. Um,
And and the kids, so there were, over 100 kids, right? And so they had different schools because it was basically from December to July-ish, to around, right? So it was that period. So they set up schools for the kids there. Yeah.
right, cottages at the Greenbrier, and the cottages. The diplomats stayed in the hotel, and they took some of the cottages and used those for schools. One set of
Hmm.
cottages for the Germans, and another for the Japanese. And this is right as you walk out of the north end of the hotel. This is all gardens today, but you see in the foreground there, the Border Patrol came from the Canadian and Mexican borders. They actually provide the security, and then those are Japanese diplomats out there doing a little exercise on the central lawn.
And one of the cool things, I don't know if people know about, there's a book that came out a year ago, I think, or 2 years ago, called In the Shadow of the Greenbrier. It's
Yeah,
historical fiction, and it's
right.
about a Jewish family or Jewish people that worked at the Greenbrier.
Right.
Now, as far as we know, there weren't the only Jew that I think I was able to do when I was writing my article was the pianist who played the piano in the lobby, and the kids seemed to like his music. I think he was the son of a rabbi or the grandson of a rabbi. I heard.
It's interesting you're showing that picture. That's Nat Portnoy there. His granddaughter, just a week ago,
Uh-huh.
turned to White Sulphur and met some people who remember Nat Portnoy. Uh,
Wow.
Had a delightful weekend. She had heard about him. She didn't know much about him, but she came up from Florida and met some of the older folks in White Sulphur. And so he played the big theatrical pipe organ. So they would play that at tea time, and we had tea time in the afternoon. It's a civilized operation. Tea time in the
Yeah.
afternoon. So he did that big organ that you see, which was a very powerful theatrical organ. And then he also did piano lessons.
Uh-huh.
To
Um,
put a little
yeah.
more meat on the bones here, just to backtrack for a moment, there were three federal departments that were involved in the detainment. There was the State Department, which handled logistics. There was the FBI that handled security, and there was INS that provided the border guards, who actually did the 24-hour surveillance of the diplomats. And the price for all of this was $10 a day for the detainee and $5 a day for the federal workers, and that was both room and board. But Benyamin, as you said earlier, the key here was the word detainment. It's just semantics, but the American government, FDR, did not want to portray this as any sort of an internment camp. Those terms were never used. It was always detainment. If you can go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Bob can go to town on this. This is a brochure from just before the diplomats came. you can see all the activities that were offered, and indeed on the right, all of those shops that
Wow.
were open to the diplomats. Before I let Bob take over, because he knows this cold, I do want to give one quick example of there was a men's clothing store there called Haberdasher, W.W. Brand. He also owned the men's clothing store at the Homestead. And his daughter was one of the people I was able to track down. She remembered she was one of the few people that were allowed into the hotel. There were no visitors for any of the diplomats. That was,
outside visitors.
yeah, these were the only inside people that came were people that worked there. And since her dad and mom owned that store, she came in and she told me some incredible stories about being there and interacting with the diplomats. And so, Bob, I mean, if you want to jump in here, you know, all of these people, the stores were Fifth Avenue stores when they got there, but very quickly, the diplomats had a lot of money to spend. And so the stores started carrying anything they could think of that Germans were stockpiling because they were going back home at some point, didn't know when, but they had money to spend. They were earning money. A Swiss diplomat who was handling the between the countries showed up in January with a briefcase with $35,000 to pass along to the pay of all the diplomats. I think it's about 600,000 in US dollars today. So there was money burning a hole in the pocket, and there were a lot of places they could spend it.
And there was also, like, I think you told me, because there was like a bar and alcohol, and like some of it was extra. It wasn't included in the stay. So they would spend money at the bar and things like that.
Alcohol,
massages, spa treatments.
all of the above.
Yeah.
Say Bob can speak to.
Well, yeah. So you see, there was lots to do there, and funny. I'm looking at the list there. The Gillespie family is still providing the flowers there today. And on the left, you see all the activities. Now, of course, diplomats were not allowed to play golf because for security, you know, it'd be tough to secure the golf courses, you know, sort of up against the wilderness. But they certainly played tennis. They were escorted down to the little walk down to the tennis courts. The swimming pool. We talked about the children. I met probably a couple of dozen of people who were children during this diplomatic, and all they remember was a swimming pool. You know, every day they could go swimming in this wonderful indoor swimming pool. So all these things, you know, they couldn't walk on the trails and all that. But there was all sorts of things to do, spend their money. In fact, the story is they pretty much bought out everything in the shops, and they started ordering from catalogs after a few months went by. Incidentally, this is a tariff sheet. So on the other side of this sheet, the rates back then would have been $12 to $20 a day. So $10 a day was a pretty good rate.
Yeah.
$5 for children too, I think, was the rate.
Yeah. It's 7:38, so I just want to make sure we're chugging along here, so we still leave plenty of time for questions. One point I want to make sure we mention is that the U.S. used this detainment as a little bit of a spy operation. So as Harvey was saying, there was three different U.S. agencies, the FBI, et cetera, who were there, State Department, who were there, who they had agents who were living there and watching over things. They were also listening in on conversations. So listening in on phone conversations that these diplomats might be having with people back in Germany or Japan. If they got drunk at the bar, the bartender may be taking notes, and handing them to the FBI afterwards. So it was a useful information gathering, intel gathering, place for them.
Yeah, there was a lot of there's a lot to unpack with the detainment, but very briefly, it could fall into three categories. The first is cabin fever. There were no visitors allowed. There were no reporters that were able to get in. The only phone calls that went out were done by the diplomats, the higher diplomats, a handful of people. And the FBI indeed was listening in and recording and transcribing every single conversation that was made. Mail was censored. There was only one newspaper that came in. The diplomats voted, and they voted to get the New York Times. Beyond cabin fever, though, it was really palace intrigue. The envoy stayed much longer than anyone had imagined because there was bureaucratic red tape. This was a day when the countries were at war, so they could not communicate directly. Spain had to intercede on behalf of Japan. Switzerland interceded on behalf of Germany. and Italy. So all the communications cables translated, submitted, sent overseas, going back and forth, decisions of who's going to go. It was every single person was scrutinized on the list. But the captives didn't know any of this. They were just in the dark, had no idea when they were going back, if they were going back, how they were going back. For them, the lives were gossip and gloom and guesswork. But they weren't going anywhere for 6 months. And finally, there was just a lot of bad blood between the detainees. This is the first time ever that Axis diplomats were living side by side, and it didn't go particularly well. The Germans were arrogant to both the Italians, and then when they got shipped out to the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina, to the Japanese who came in on New Year's Day, 1942, the seams were busting. There were over 1,000 diplomats at the Greenbrier for those couple of months. And the two most hated people in America were the Japanese ambassador, Ambassador Nomura, and Special Envoy Kurusu, who were literally in Cordell Hull's office when the bombs were raining down on Pearl Harbor, supposedly trying to negotiate a peace. And one of those guard shacks that was in a photo a couple of photos ago, one of the guards scribbled on the wall saying, "I don't know which one Kurusu is, but I'd like to wring his neck." Exactly. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was the one of the shots. But in terms of, it went from bad to worse. I mean, there was the time was no one knew when they were leaving, how they were leaving, and in the end, they did get the okay. And if you go forward, we can see how and when they went back.
Is that the boat?
Let's judge back one, if we can, for the German group there.
This one?
Yeah, that's the whole German group. Up close to the next one, there are a couple of people I mentioned, want to talk about real quick. Hans Thompson, right in the middle, with that jaunty look and a pipe in his hand. To our left, to his right, that's Friedrich von Bodecker, the Nazi military attaché. And to the far right, that gentleman with the balding head, Herbert von Schleipel. He was a Gestapo agent. There were several mixed in. Spies are always interfused with diplomats. But I want to especially mention the gentleman, the white-haired gentleman standing right behind Hans Thompson, very distinguished looking with the white hair and hands clasped. He was the German chancellor. His name was Willy Grams. And you have to get up pretty early in the morning to find a document that Bob Conte does not already have. But I got a letter from this gentleman's granddaughter. And this was a letter that he wrote to his son, his adult son, who was not interned at the Greenbrier because he was an adult and he was going to college. But very quickly, I just want to read a portion of it. I would have put it in my book had I gotten it early enough. He writes to his son, Horst, "You know the Greenbrier Hotel, one of the largest hotels in the States. We went there many years ago. We walked through the park and peered through the dining room windows because it looked too expensive for us to go inside. Now we have a very nice room and we get our breakfast, lunch, and dinner in that dining room. The hotel has several stores inside where we can buy almost anything we want, even liquor. Outside, we have a walk for use of the park, an area larger than the Walter Reed complex, a little small for 1,000 persons, but nice."
Yeah. So I want to get. So it's 7:44, Harvey. Can we move to the section where they're finally being shipped out?
Put the next slide up.
Yeah.
There it is. This was the Drottenholm. This was a Swedish ship that was employed to carry the Germans and the Italians. They were shipped by train. They walked to the train station to New York, where they got on this ship, which went from New York to Lisbon. All the American diplomats from Rome and Berlin had been sent to Lisbon, so that's where the exchange was made. The other ship was called the Gripsholm. That was the ship that the Japanese took. That literally went 3/4 of the way around the earth. It went first to South America to pick up a lot more Japanese diplomats, and then to Lourdes Marcus, which is today Mozambique, where again, there was the swap. The Japanese got off, the Americans got on. And if you just go quick to the next one, when Hans Thompson in the middle and Friedrich von Bottcher on the left got back, they got a hero's welcome. You might know the name of the gentleman there that they're shaking hands with.
Yeah. So just give people an idea. This is a huge facility. It's I think 11,000 acres, right, Bob?
That's what it is now, right?
Yeah, 11,000 acres. And I have some modern day pictures, which maybe I'll put up when we do the Q&A. Harvey and Bob, is it okay if we open it up to questions now?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. There you go. There's Isabel.
Great. Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for that fascinating discussion. And thank you to our audience. We have some really great questions that I'm going to ask. And just a reminder, if you haven't yet submitted your question, feel free to do so while we're talking. The first question actually we got from a few different listeners. They're wondering if during the war, the American public knew that all of this was happening, and if they did, what was the general reaction to it? How did your average American feel about what was happening?
I can absolutely take that. Americans were outraged that the diplomats of the warring countries were being housed in such beautiful, beautiful resorts. And they came down hard on the government. One guy wrote in and said, "Why does our government deem it necessary to pamper the delegation of yellow rats by housing them at one of the country's finest winter resorts?" America back then was a very segregated, racist, sexist country, far more than today. And the language that people used, especially to describe the Japanese, but also the Nazis, let's say, was very colorful.
It was on the front page of the New York Times. So people did on December 20th.
Correct.
With a picture of Hans Thompson arriving at the Greenbrier. And
yes, the first and last time that Hans and BB Thompson were in the New York Times, and you were exactly right. Front page cover, arriving. This picture was them leaving the embassy, in the hulking embassy in DC, but where they were going? To your place, Bob.
But after that, there was very little covered. Press wasn't allowed there. But
not at all.
From the Greenbrier's point of view, from Lauren Johnson, we have some correspondence. They thought this was a very patriotic thing. This is something they could do to help the war effort. And the government was asking them to do this, and they were prompt and ready to do it with very little question.
As a matter of fact, I have a slide here. After the war, the Greenbrier came into service again of America when the government asked if they could turn the Greenbrier into a hospital, military hospital for returning soldiers. And so here's pictures of them. It was a great, like you said, the White Sulphur Springs. It's known for its healing waters, and so it was good for these soldiers coming home who wanted to stay there.
Well, thank you for elaborating on that. We have sort of a related question that also a number of our listeners are asking about. You all sort of touched on the fact that one of the reasons why the U.S. chose to house, these foreign diplomats in such, beautiful, luxurious places was that they hoped American diplomats would be treated well overseas. So a few people are wondering, did this happen? Were American diplomats treated well? Like, did that strategy pan out?
Unfortunately, the answer to that would be a resounding no. The Americans, we were the gold standard. The treatment that we gave the Access diplomats was the top of the bar. It's very simple to go through the rest very quickly. The next was Germany. Germany did a decent job of taking care of American diplomats. They put them into a very faded resort hotel in a place called Bad Nauheim. But Germany was at war, so the food was nowhere near at the level of the Greenbrier. In fact, the people there would back and forth. They could hear what was going on in the Greenbrier, and they nicknamed their place Black Sulphur Springs, as opposed to White Sulphur Springs, where the access diplomats were. The next on the list would be Italy. Italy did a very good job with the Americans that were there. They actually were never detained. They lived in their own apartments wherever they were getting ready to leave. The only thing they had to do was when they went out, they were accompanied by a couple of members of the Carabinieri, but they were treated well also. By far, the lowest of the totem pole were the Japanese. The Japanese treatment of Americans was atrocious. It was, in some cases, not diplomats much, but a lot of businessmen were tortured, starved. And when they got off the ship in Mozambique, when the Japanese came off the ship, well-dressed, well-fed, fancy luggage, women dressed to the nines, and the Americans were like bags of bones with like sticks holding together, suitcases tied with cord. So that's very quickly what it was, and we were by far the gold standard.
Thank you for sharing. We have another question about all of these incredible photographs that you've been showing throughout the presentation. One of our viewers is wondering who took these photographs. Was it members of the press, other people at the Greenbrier? Sort of how did this archival material come to be?
Yeah, that's an interesting story.
I'll pull some up there.
I happened to meet a man named Robert Parker, and he was the head of public relations for the Greenbrier. And he literally took the photos that we see. There were maybe a dozen of them, and he took them, and he held on to them, and he gave them to me 30 years later. And literally, if it wasn't for Mr. Parker, we wouldn't have any pictures.
Wow, that's incredible. I wouldn't have guessed it was one person. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. While we're here, we have another question for you, Dr. Conte, about the Greenbrier today, and sort of how it does or doesn't deal with this complicated history. Is this something that guests coming to the Greenbrier often know about or want to learn about? Is this something that, the resort routinely talks about? How does it sort of reckon with its past today?
Oh, sure. We give tours. I gave about 1 million tours over the years.
Here's a picture of a woman giving a tour earlier this year.
We have slide presentations in the winter months. We have a museum on the property, the President's Cottage. And oh yeah, I think the Greenbrier is very proud of it, especially that Army hospital experience. Almost 25,000 soldiers came to this luxury resort and were treated, and most of them left in better shape than when they arrived. So this is one of the high points of Greenbrier history, and we very much talk about it.
I think I have a picture here of a one-legged soldier playing golf on.
I met somebody who knew that guy, said he was actually pretty good. The game's hard enough on 2 legs, but one game.
Amazing. That's truly an incredible photo. And thank you for sharing. We have another question about during the war, when these diplomats were detained there. You touched on briefly about how, the FBI and other agencies were sort of using this to collect intelligence, but we have a viewer wondering about the actual staff at the Greenbrier, if they were sort of briefed by any U.S. officials about how they should or shouldn't engage with these foreign officials who were detained there.
Well, they were warned from the get-go to assume that these were agents of the foreign, and to be very careful. They didn't put FBI agents act there as waiters and waitresses, but when those, say the waiters and waitresses in the dining room would come off the floor, the FBI agents would ask them, "Did you overhear anything?" So they were sort of recruited, but they were basically treat these diplomats as regular guests.
Here's a picture. I think here's a picture of the ballroom, by the way.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah. There was
Isabel, to go a little further on that question. There were the FBI tried to tap informants among the staff wherever they could.
Mhm.
Masseurs and masseuses were a favorite touch because they felt that when people are getting treatment, they might loosen up their lips and talk a little. In addition, there were a number of diplomats, low-level diplomats, who were already spies that had been in the embassies,
Oh,
4 or 5, a couple of Japanese, at least one Italian, and a couple of Germans. And these were people that once again would be talking to the FBI agents and sometimes to state, depending. There was not a lot of love lost between the FBI and state. They were at loggerheads, even though we were all on the same side. But yeah, to that question, that's a great question. The walls had ears. There was a lot of listening going on, and any information that we could get. As an example, we did not send the Japanese from Pearl Harbor to the Greenbrier. We could have. The diplomats that were in Pearl Harbor in Honolulu when there was the attack, they were sent to a dude ranch in Arizona, completely isolated. The only time they met their Japanese compatriots is when they met in New York to get on the ship to go back to their home country. Isolation was a key here, and any information that we could glean, however we could, that is what America did.
Wow. Thank you for sharing such a fascinating history. We have a couple people have asked about the Greenbrier before the war and are wondering if Jews were allowed to stay there before the war, and also if there were any Jews on staff at the Greenbrier either before or during the war.
Bob, go on. I'll do it if you got. There were very, I couldn't find. I saw the lists for both hotels. As Benyamin said at the outset, very, very few Jews in West Virginia and Virginia at that time. But that said, the most interesting part of the story is that the State Department ran the internment, the detainment, excuse me. And the guy that ran that was a guy named Breckinridge Long. He was the Undersecretary of State who was in charge. He was very anti-Semitic. He really didn't care much about how the diplomats were treated. He later lost his job because he inflated numbers about refugees that were coming in and downplayed the Holocaust. So in terms of anti-Semitism there, it came from the top, even though Breckinridge Long was actually never at the Greenbrier. But he testified before Congress, lied before Congress in 1943 after the diplomats were left about the number of Jewish immigrants being allowed to come in. And he was fired and left the service the next day, disgraced as he should have been.
Well, thank you for sharing. I know we're nearing 8, so I think we have time for about one more question. But before I ask it, a couple people have written in and asked if this is being recorded. The answer is yes. It'll be up on the museum's YouTube by early next week. So now for, I think, what will be our final question, a couple people have asked now about the history after the war, and they're wondering, after this detainment ended and after the war ended, how quickly the Greenbrier went back to, hosting regular guests at the resort.
Very quickly. In fact, that's one of the best things that ever happened. First of all, I need to know the Army bought the Army actually owned the Greenbrier during the Second World War. So the railroad sold it to the Army. The railroad bought it back. And one of the best things that ever happened is they bought it back immediately. They hired a famous New York decorator, Dorothy Draper. All this color that you see in these photos goes back to this significant redecoration in 1947 and 48, and it was back up and running in 1948. Other hotels that were taken over by the Army did not have that luck. They kind of stumbled along for months, but the Greenbrier was ready to go in April of 1948.
Well, thank you for sharing in such beautiful pictures of the Greenbrier today. So we're just at 8. We're right on time. So that'll be it for the questions. But thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions, and of course, a huge thank you Harvey, Benyamin, and Robert for coming and giving this wonderful presentation and discussion today. Thank you also for everyone who joined us on Zoom today. If you enjoyed the program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum, which you can do at mjhnyc.org/support. We also hope that we'll see all of you for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events. Those links are also there for you in the chat. As I mentioned, you can watch past programs and also view and share today's recording, which will be available on the museum's YouTube channel by early next week. So thank you all again so much for joining us. We hope you have a great night and we'll see you soon. Thank you.